Welcome to VLearn Virtual Learning Network. This is session number 13 of Social Problems in India and the topic is poverty and its social dynamics. Topics to be covered are poverty as a social problem, definition and approaches to poverty, causes of poverty, consequences of poverty, and the last one is poverty alleviations programs. Now come to the first topic, that is poverty as a social problem. There has been poverty in all societies over a long period. However, the extent of poverty is more in such countries other than every society have. However, affluent has people who are poor. The conditions and the pay in the household were depressing. However, this can be said to be the beginning of the idea of public assistance to the poor. It has been so much with us that not much attention has been paid to it, and it was considered a normal aspect of any society. Till recently, there has been little sense of social responsibility for dealing with poverty. This is different from involuntary poverty, where the necessities of life are in very short supply. Systematic study of the poverty in a recent phenomena, it has been suggested that there were 4 questions that need to be answered to understand poverty. First one is, what is poverty? What is the extent of poverty? What is the cause of poverty? And the last one is, what are the solutions? Definition and approaches to poverty. The approach to define poverty has usually been economic terms, the level of income, property, and living standards. People are said to be poor when their income is such that it does not enable to meet the basic needs such as food, shelter, and clothing. The concept of poverty line used both in India and US, fixed and income. If people fall below this line, they are considered to be poor, and the poverty line is arbitrarily fixed. Hence, there can be question about it. Nevertheless, it does provide one way to determining who the poor are. Sometimes the pauperism is used to denote extreme poverty, and it describes a category of people who are unable to maintain themselves. In recent times, there are many dimensions that are considered in looking at poverty. It is no longer seen as purely an economic phenomenon. Poverty is not only a condition of economic insufficiency, and it is also social and political exclusion. Poverty is therefore to be seen not only merely in economic terms, but also in its social and political aspects. Thus, poverty has been related to the prevailing socio-economic structure of the society. Experts on poverty have broadly used 2 approaches. First, the nutritional approach. Here, poverty is measured on the basis of minimum food requirements. And second, the relative deprivation approach. Here, poverty is seen in terms of relative deprivation of the section of population against the pre-developed section. Approaches. There are various approaches for the measurement of poverty. The major factor considered in measuring poverty is income. If an adult person is unable to have a certain number of calories a day, he is considered to be poor. The economic aspect usually involves the judgment of basic need and is mentioned in terms of resources required to maintain health and physical efficiency. Such an approach is now being questioned. Among the basic needs are also include education, security, leisure, and recreation. Absolute poverty. Absolute poverty refers to inability of a person or a household to provide even the basic necessities of life. It refers to condition of acute physical wants, starvation, malnutrition, want of clothes, want of shelter, total lack of medical care at the time of absolute poverty is also called subsistence poverty, since it is based on the assessment of minimum subsistence requirement. Nutrition is measured by intake of calories and proteins, shelter by quality of dwelling and degree of overcrowding, and the rate of infant mortality and quality of medical facility. It is difficult to fully accept the argument and the nourishment needs of a farm laborer would be different from those of a clerk in an office. Similarly, clothing requirements will also differ. If cultural needs are also included, then measurements become more complex. Relative poverty, as there are difficulties in accepting absolute poverty fully Another term is relative poverty has been developed. Poverty according to this concept is to measured according to the standard of life as a given time and place. The idea is that standard of society can be changing standards. Definition of poverty should therefore be related to the needs and demands of changing societies. Causes of poverty, inequality and poverty. Inequality is generated by the capitalist economy where wealth is concentrated in the land of a few. According to Marx, these few gain control of the means of producing wealth such as slaves, land and capital. They are able to influence the political process and by which social inequality is managed. Essentially, poverty boils down to this fact that some people are poor because others are rich. Since the rich have greater political power than the poor, the government policy tends to favor them. The rich therefore tends to remain rich and the poor tends to remain poor. Vicious cycle theory. The poor have inadequate diet which make for low energy and hence poor performance in school and at work. Poor diet also makes them vulnerable to illness and they have poor housing and often have to go long distances for their work. They cannot afford and not allowed to stay near the place of work. The circumstances combine to make the poor continue to be in poverty. Geographical factors. Poverty is explained at times by the geographical conditions in which people live. The resources are scarce and people are unable to overcome the problems of lack of resources. The desert area and the hill areas are good examples. In India, certain areas have been designated as drought-prone areas. Survey in these areas indicate that not only that the conditions are poor, but in spite of hard work, they are unable to overcome the situation. Consequences of poverty. Poverty survives in part because it is useful to a number of groups in society. Poverty benefits the non-poor in general and rich and the powerful in particular. There are a number of functions of poverty. Poverty ensures that dirty work will get done and there are many manual jobs that have to be done in the society. It is the poor who take up such jobs. In poverty provides a market for inferior goods and services, second-hand clothes, steel, food material, poor houses and services from unqualified persons. Poverty facilitates a lifestyle of the affluent. Now, poverty and its consequences. Culture of poverty. The individual who grow up in this culture has strong feeling of fatalisms, helplessness, dependence and inferiority. Their orientation is to living in present. They hardly think of the future and in brief it can be said that the culture of poverty is both an adoption and a reaction of the poor in the marginal position. It is an effort to cope with the feeling of hopelessness and despair due to a realization that it is almost impossible to achieve success according to values of the high societies. Their isolation also means lack of participation in the activities of the society, political, social and economic. There are many criticisms of this concept. One of the questions that it reveals is as to whether the culture of poverty applies to the rural conditions. Lewis develops the concept on the basis of his studies in slum areas. There is some evidence that the poor in rural areas also have developed a subcultural and defense mechanisms. Some feel that the poor do not participate not because of the culture that they have developed but because of the large society in a way prevent their full participation. Another criticism is that the concept of culture of poverty tends to put the blame on the poor for being poor rather than holding the social system responsible. Poverty in India. In recent years, there has been a decline in the proportion of people living below the poverty line at the all-Indian level. However, those are several regional variations among the state. Again, in some of the state, while the extent urban poverty has declined, the rural poverty has increased. For example, state of Karnataka, Odisha, Tamil Nadu and West Bengal. In the case of Haryana, Kerala, while rural poverty has declined, urban poverty has marginally increased. In the case of Assam and Madhya Pradesh, extent of poverty has increased both in the rural and in urban areas. Inequality of income distribution. Income distribution is very unequal. The maldistribution of assets leaves at least one-third of the population without effective means of satisfying their basic needs. The net result is that a large number of people lie just below the poverty line or above the poverty line, and a few keep on accumulating assets. Because of such a phenomenon, one wonders whether the gap between the poor and the rich can be bridged. Poverty is the result of unequal distribution of production assets, entitlements and surpluses, and reinforcement by the power structure of closely knit economic, political and bureaucratical forces and vested interests. Planning in India, this is Poverty Alleviations Program. Planning in India has always had some concern about high level of poverty. The approach in the earlier plan has tended to deal with the problem indirectly, that is increasing of GNP, land reform, provisions of services, minimum needs program, etc. The present strategy of direct attack on poverty through specific poverty alleviations program is justified on account of insufficient percolation of benefits to the poor from overall economic growth, and it should be appreciated that the strategy of direct attack on poverty can be sustained and would not yield the desired result if the growth of the economy itself is so, and the benefit of such growth is inequitably distributed. The economic betterment of the poor sections can't be achieved without social transformation involving structural changes, educational development, growth in awareness, and change in outlook, motivation, and attitude. The IRDP and Employment Program, the Integrated Rural Development Program, was introduced in the late 70s, and the main objective of IRD program was to evolve an operational integration strategy for the purpose on the one hand of increasing production and productivity in agriculture and allied sector based on better use of land, water and light, and on the other of the resources and income development of vulnerable sections of the population in blocks of the various countries. The integration is in terms of bringing various programs which deal with specific programs of areas together. The programs of Special Rice Program, Operation Floods Program for handlooms, sericultural, etc. Steps were to be taken to increase the industries, services and business. The financial assistance consisted of subsidies and loans. Unemployment is a major factor in poverty, and in rural areas agricultural labor has work available only seasonally. The rate of unemployment has tended to increase. Now, two programs in these areas were initiated, namely NREP, that is National Rural Employment Program, Rural Landless Employment Generated Program. The program envisaged creation of durable assets such as irrigation canal, social forestry, social conservation, roads, school buildings, etc. The RLEGP was introduced with the objective of improving and expanding employment opportunities for the rural landless, and it aims at providing guarantee of employment for at least one member of every landless household up to 100 days, and also to create durable assets. Women and Youth and Area Development Program. This program entitled Development of Women and Child in Rural Areas and was initiated as a pilot project in the early 80s. The purpose was to increase the income and also to provide support service needed to enable them to take up income generation activities. Employment, education and improvement of health was the focus for improving the status of women. Training of rural youth for self-employment was also launched in the beginning of the sixth plan, and the target group was youth between the age of 18 and 35 from families living below the poverty line, and the number to be trained was 40 per block per annum. Stipends to be selected with youth were provided. Efforts were made to stipends to the selected youth were provided. Efforts were made to provide training relevant to the needs of the geographical areas, and there are areas which are affected adversely because nature has not been bontified to them. The income in these areas are subject to great fluctuation, and the major emphasis in the urban areas was the environmental improvement of the urban slums. Now there are some questions on the basis of this session. First, discuss poverty and its consequences. What are the causes of poverty? And the third one is, what is a minimum approach to poverty? That's it for this session. Thank you. Happy learning. We learning.